I was standing in my driveway when Patricia Whitmore pulled up in her pristine white Lexus, and I knew immediately that my peaceful Tuesday afternoon in Fairbanks, Alaska, was about to go sideways. I had a Snowmachine torn apart in my garage, the engine components spread across a clean tarp, and I was elbow-deep in carburetor cleaning solution when I heard her car door slam. My name is Lucas Randolph, and I had been running a small Snowmachine repair business out of my home for the past 3 years without a single complaint. That was about to change. "Excuse me," Patricia called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the cold January air. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than the Snowmachine I was currently rebuilding, and her blonde hair was styled in that aggressive bob that seemed to be the uniform of HOA board presidents everywhere. "Are you Lucas Randolph?" "That's me," I said, wiping my hands on a rag as I walked toward her. The temperature was hovering around -15, and I could see her breath coming out in angry little puffs. "I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Northwood Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here about the illegal business operation you're running from your residence." I felt my jaw tighten. "It's not illegal. I have a business license and I'm zoned for mechanical services. I checked everything before I started." She pulled out a folder from her car, flipping through papers with practiced efficiency. "According to the HOA covenant, commercial activities are strictly prohibited in this neighborhood. Section 12, paragraph 3. "I read the covenant before I bought the house," I said, keeping my voice level. "There's nothing in there about home-based businesses, and like I said, the city approved my license. I'm operating completely within the law." Patricia's expression hardened. "The noise, the traffic, the unsightly equipment in your driveway. This is a residential neighborhood, Mr. Randolph. We have standards." "What noise? I work during reasonable hours. And what traffic? I get maybe 2 or 3 clients a week, and they're usually gone within an hour." "I've received multiple complaints from your neighbors," she said, though she didn't specify who or how many. "Effective immediately, you need to cease all commercial activities at this address. If you don't comply, we'll be forced to take legal action." I stood there watching her drive away, feeling a cold anger settling in my chest that had nothing to do with the Alaskan winter. I had spent months getting all my permits in order, making sure everything was legitimate. My business license clearly stated I was approved for mechanical repair services at my home address. The city zoning office had confirmed I was in a residential commercial overlay district, which meant home-based businesses were explicitly allowed as long as they didn't create significant disturbances. I went back inside and called my buddy Tom Henderson, who worked at the city planning department. We had gone to high school together, and he had actually been the one to help me navigate the licensing process when I first started. "Tom, I've got a problem," I said when he picked up. I explained the situation with Patricia and the HOA. "That doesn't make sense," Tom said. I could hear him typing on his computer. "Let me pull up your file. Yeah, you're definitely zoned for this. The property is in Zone R2C, which allows for home-based mechanical services as long as you're not operating a full commercial garage with employees and constant foot traffic. You filed everything correctly. Can the HOA override city zoning? No, they can't. HOA covenants can't supersede municipal zoning laws. If the city says you're allowed to operate, the HOA can't shut you down just because they don't like it. They can have rules about aesthetics, noise levels during certain hours, that kind of thing, but they can't ban an activity that's legally permitted by the city." I thanked Tom and hung up, feeling slightly better. I pulled out my copy of the HOA covenant and read through it carefully. Section 12 did talk about commercial activities, but it was specifically referring to retail operations, professional offices with regular client traffic, and businesses that would significantly alter the residential character of the neighborhood. There was nothing about home-based repair work. The next morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a formal cease and desist, threatening daily fines of $200 if I didn't shut down my business within 72 hours. They claimed I was in violation of the covenant and that my activities constituted a nuisance. I spent the afternoon drafting a response. I kept it professional but firm, citing my business license, the city zoning approval, and the specific language in the HOA covenant that didn't actually prohibit what I was doing. I included copies of all my documentation and sent it back via certified mail. 3 days later, Patricia showed up again, this time with another woman who introduced herself as Karen Sutherland, the HOA's vice president. Of course, her name was Karen. "Mr. Randolph, you were supposed to cease operations," Patricia said. "I could see a snow machine in my garage behind me, and I had just finished installing a new track on it. I sent you a detailed response explaining why I'm not in violation of anything," I said. "Did you read it?" "We don't care what the city says," Karen chimed in. She was shorter than Patricia, with dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. "This is a private community with its own rules. You agreed to follow those rules when you bought your house." "I am following the rules," I said. "Show me the specific section that prohibits home-based mechanical repair work." Patricia thrust a piece of paper at me. It was a new document, dated just 2 days ago. At an emergency board meeting, we voted to amend the covenant to explicitly prohibit all commercial repair services within the community. I stared at the paper, feeling that cold anger return. You can't just change the rules to target one person. And don't covenant amendments require a vote from all homeowners? The board has the authority to make amendments in emergency situations, Patricia said. This was an emergency. What emergency? Me fixing snow machines in my own garage. The degradation of property values, Karen said. That's an emergency. I knew I was dealing with people who had made up their minds and weren't interested in reason. I'm not shutting down my business. It's legal and you know it. Then we'll see you in court, Patricia said, and they both walked back to her car. Over the next week, I did some research. I found out that HOA covenant amendments did indeed require a vote from the membership, not just the board. The board could make minor rule changes about things like pool hours or landscaping requirements, but substantive changes to the covenant required a majority vote of all homeowners. This was clearly a substantive change, and they had done it without following proper procedure. I also learned that Patricia and Karen lived on the same street, about 6 houses down from each other, and they had been running the HOA like their personal fiefdom for years. There were complaints on neighborhood forums about arbitrary fines, selective rule enforcement, and a general attitude of tyranny. Several people had tried to run against them for board positions, but had been intimidated or outmaneuvered. I decided to fight back. I hired an attorney named Jennifer Morrison who specialized in HOA disputes. She was in her late 30s, sharp as a tack, and she didn't like bullies. "This is pretty clear-cut," Jennifer said after reviewing my documents. "They violated their own procedures in amending the covenant. Your business is legally permitted by the city, and they are engaging in what looks like targeted harassment. We can fight this." "What's it going to cost me?" "I'll be honest, HOA cases can get expensive. But I think we can resolve this fairly quickly if we push hard right from the start. They're clearly in the wrong, and they know it. They're just hoping you'll back down." We filed a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and improper covenant amendment. We also filed a complaint with the city about the HOA attempting to override municipal zoning laws. Jennifer sent a strongly worded letter to the HOA board informing them that any fines they levied would be challenged, and that they could be personally liable for damages. That got their attention. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a man named Robert Chen, who introduced himself as the HOA treasurer. He sounded tired. "Mr. Randolph, I want to apologize for how this situation has been handled," he said. "I was outvoted on the board about the amendment. I don't think what you're doing is a problem, and I certainly don't think we should have changed the rules just to go after you." "Why are Patricia and Karen so determined to shut me down?" Robert sighed. "Honestly, I think it's personal. Patricia's husband left her last year, and she's been taking it out on everyone. Karen just likes the power. They've decided that anything they don't personally approve of is a threat to the neighborhood. That's not how HOAs are supposed to work. I know. Look, there are some of us on the board who want to resolve this. Can we set up a meeting? Maybe we can work something out without going to court." I agreed, mostly because I was already spending money on attorney fees that I would have preferred to spend on my business. Jennifer advised me to be cautious but open to negotiation. The meeting was held at the community center, a small building near the entrance to the neighborhood. The entire HOA board was there. Patricia, Karen, Robert, and 2 other members I hadn't met, Susan Martinez and David Thompson. Jennifer came with me. Patricia started the meeting by reading a prepared statement about the importance of maintaining neighborhood standards and property values. It was condescending and pointless. Jennifer cut her off. "Let's skip the speech and get to the facts. Your covenant amendment was procedurally invalid. Mr. Randolph's business is legally permitted by the city. You have no grounds to shut him down, and if you continue this harassment, you will lose in court and potentially face personal liability." Karen's face turned red. "This is our neighborhood, and we have the right to protect it from commercial intrusion. You have the right to enforce valid covenant provisions," Jennifer said. "You don't have the right to make up new rules on the spot and target individual homeowners. That's called selective enforcement, and it's illegal." Susan Martinez, who had been quiet up to this point, spoke up. "I've been reviewing the documents, and I think Miss Morrison is right. We didn't follow proper procedure on the amendment. And looking at Mr. Randolph's business license and the zoning approval, I don't see how we can legally force him to stop." David Thompson nodded. "I agree. I think we made a mistake here." Patricia looked like she had swallowed something bitter. "So we're just going to let him turn this neighborhood into an industrial park?" "He's repairing snow machines in his garage," Robert said. "That's hardly an industrial park, and frankly, in Fairbanks, almost everyone works on their own machines. This is what people do here." "Then why have an HOA at all if we can't maintain standards?" Karen demanded. "Standards are fine," Jennifer said. "Arbitrary rules that violate homeowner rights are not. Here's what we're proposing. You rescind the improper covenant amendment, you drop all threats of fines, and you issue a written acknowledgement that Mr. Randolph's business is permitted. In exchange, Mr. Randolph agrees to maintain the aesthetic appearance of his property, limit work hours to reasonable times, and keep noise to a minimum." "That's what I've been doing all along," I said. "I've never wanted to cause problems. I just want to make a living." Susan looked at Patricia. "I think we should accept this. If we go to court, we're going to lose, and it's going to cost the HOA a lot of money that comes from everyone's dues." Patricia and Karen exchanged looks. I could tell they wanted to keep fighting, but they were outnumbered. "Fine," Patricia said finally, "but I want it documented that the board is agreeing under protest." "Protest whatever you want," Jennifer said. "Just put it in writing." We drafted and signed an agreement right there. The HOA would rescind the amendment, and I would continue operating my business according to all applicable laws and regulations. It wasn't a complete victory because I still felt like I had been bullied and harassed for weeks over nothing, but at least I could get back to work without threats hanging over my head. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks after the meeting, I came home to find a citation taped to my front door. It was from the City Code Enforcement Office, claiming I was operating a commercial garage without proper permits and violating residential zoning laws. Someone had filed a complaint. I called Tom at the planning department immediately. "Tom, what is this? I thought you said I was fully permitted." "You are," Tom said. "Let me check who filed the complaint." I heard him typing. It was filed anonymously, but it came through a city council member's office. "Give me a day to sort this out. This is clearly someone trying to cause trouble." I had a pretty good idea who that someone was. I called Jennifer and told her what happened. "Let me make some calls," she said. "If Patricia or Karen are behind this, they're violating the agreement we just signed." It turned out to be Karen. Tom discovered that she had called her friend on the city council and convinced him that I was running an illegal commercial operation. The council member had passed it to code enforcement without checking the facts. When Tom showed them my permits and zoning approval, the citation was immediately withdrawn, and the council member was not happy about being used to harass a legitimate business owner. Jennifer sent a formal letter to Karen and the HOA board, pointing out that this appeared to be retaliation and a violation of our agreement. She suggested that if there were any more incidents, we would be filing a more comprehensive lawsuit, including claims for intentional infliction of emotional distress and abuse of process. That seemed to quiet things down for a while. I went back to work, rebuilding engines and replacing tracks on Snowmachines. My business was actually growing because word had gotten around about the quality of my work. I had clients coming from all over the Fairbanks area. Then spring came, and with it, a new problem. Patricia filed a complaint with the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, claiming I was improperly disposing of hazardous materials. Specifically, she alleged that I was dumping used motor oil and other chemicals into the storm drains. This was completely false. I had a contract with a licensed waste disposal company that picked up all my used oil, antifreeze, and other materials every month. I kept meticulous records because I knew how important it was to handle hazardous waste properly. An inspector from DEC showed up at my house on a rainy April afternoon. His name was Mike Foster, and he looked tired and annoyed. "I'm here about a complaint regarding hazardous waste disposal," he said. "I have to inspect your property." "No problem," I said. I showed him my waste storage area, which was a locked cabinet in my garage with clearly labeled containers. I showed him my disposal contracts and my monthly pickup records. Everything was in perfect order. Mike looked through everything and shook his head. "This is one of the cleanest operations I've seen. Whoever filed this complaint either lied or has no idea what they're talking about." "It was my HOA president," I said. "She's been harassing me for months because she doesn't want me running a business from my home, even though it's completely legal." Mike's expression darkened. "Filing false reports with DEC is a serious matter. It wastes state resources and can result in penalties." "Do you want to file a counter-complaint? I'll talk to my attorney about it." After Mike left, I called Jennifer again. I was getting tired of having her on speed dial, but Patricia and Karen seemed determined to make my life miserable. "This is escalating," Jennifer said. They're not just violating your agreement anymore. Filing a false report with a state agency could be criminal. We need to consider whether to involve law enforcement. I just want them to leave me alone. I understand, but at some point, you have to stand up to bullies or they'll never stop. Let me send another letter, but this time I'm going to be very explicit about the potential criminal consequences of their actions. Jennifer's letter must have been effective, because I didn't hear anything from Patricia or Karen for the next 2 months. I actually started to relax, thinking maybe they had finally given up. I was wrong. In late June, I got a call from one of my clients, a guy named Steve who ran a tour company. He sounded upset. "Lucas, I just got a weird phone call. Some woman claiming to be from the Better Business Bureau said your business isn't legitimate and that I should be careful about using your services. She said there were multiple complaints about your work." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell her?" I told her she was crazy. "You've done great work for me, but I thought you should know someone spreading rumors about you." I called the Better Business Bureau office in Fairbanks and spoke to the director. They had no record of any complaints about my business, and no one from their office had been calling my clients. Someone was impersonating them. This was beyond HOA disputes now. This was potentially fraud and defamation. I called Jennifer and also called the Fairbanks Police Department. The officer who took my report was a veteran cop named Sarah Wells. She listened to my story, including all the previous harassment from Patricia and Karen, and her expression grew serious. "You have any proof that these women are behind the phone calls?" "Not direct proof, but the timing is suspicious. And they've already filed false complaints with multiple agencies. It's a pattern of harassment. Let me do some investigating. If we can trace the calls, we might have grounds for charges. Making false reports to government agencies and impersonating a business organization are both crimes." Over the next few days, Sarah worked with the phone company to trace the calls to Steve and several other clients who had received similar messages. It turned out the calls had come from a prepaid cell phone, but they had been made from locations near Karen's house. Security camera footage from a nearby business showed Karen's car parked at the location during the time of the calls. Sarah showed up at my house a week later with news. "We have enough evidence to charge Karen Sutherland with criminal impersonation and making false statements. We're also looking at Patricia Whitmore as a possible co-conspirator because we have text messages between them discussing dealing with your business." "How did you get their text messages?" "Karen's son actually brought them to us. Apparently, he found out what his mother was doing and was horrified. He's a business owner himself, and he couldn't believe she was trying to destroy someone's legitimate business over a personal vendetta. Karen was arrested on a Friday afternoon. Patricia was brought in for questioning but wasn't immediately charged. The story made the local news because HOA disputes don't usually escalate to criminal charges, and it became a bit of a sensation. I got calls from neighbors I had never met, expressing support and apologizing for not speaking up earlier. Several of them said they had also been harassed by Patricia and Karen over the years, but had been too intimidated to fight back. One couple said they had been fined repeatedly for having the wrong shade of paint on their front door. Another said they had been threatened with legal action for planting flowers that weren't on the approved list. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and asked both Patricia and Karen to resign. Patricia refused initially, but when it became clear that the majority of homeowners wanted her gone, she finally stepped down. Karen resigned as part of a plea agreement on the criminal charges. The criminal case moved slowly, as these things do. Karen was charged with criminal impersonation, a misdemeanor in Alaska, and making false reports, another misdemeanor. Patricia was eventually charged as an accessory because the text messages showed she had encouraged Karen and had provided her with the contact information for my clients. In the meantime, the HOA elected a new board. Robert Chen became the president, and several other reasonable people joined. One of their first acts was to formally apologize to me and to review all the fines and complaints that had been issued over the past several years. They found dozens of instances of arbitrary and selective enforcement. They also revised the entire covenant to make it clearer and more reasonable. The new version explicitly allowed home-based businesses as long as they complied with city zoning and didn't create genuine nuisances. They established clear procedures for complaints and made sure the board couldn't just make up rules on the fly. The criminal cases went to trial in October. I had to testify, explaining the entire timeline of harassment. My attorney Jennifer also testified about the improper covenant amendment and the pattern of retaliation. Steve and several other clients testified about receiving the fake calls. The evidence was overwhelming. Karen was found guilty on both charges and sentenced to 90 days in jail, suspended on the condition that she complete 200 hours of community service and pay restitution for my attorney fees and lost business. She was also placed on probation for 2 years. Patricia was found guilty of being an accessory and received a similar sentence, though her jail time was only 60 days, also suspended. They were both ordered to have no contact with me and were banned from serving on any HOA board in Alaska for 5 years. The civil lawsuit was settled out of court. The HOA's insurance company agreed to pay my attorney fees and compensate me for the business income I had lost during the months of harassment. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to cover my costs and give me a little cushion. More importantly, I got my life back. I could work in my garage without worrying about some crazy complaint being filed against me. My business continued to grow, and I eventually hired an assistant to help with the workload. The new HOA board turned out to be reasonable and professional. They focused on actual community issues like maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events, rather than trying to micromanage everyone's lives. Property values actually went up after Patricia and Karen were gone, probably because people weren't afraid to buy into the neighborhood anymore. I ran into Patricia once at the grocery store, about 6 months after the trial. She saw me and quickly turned down another aisle. I didn't chase after her. I had spent enough time and energy on that situation, and I was ready to move on. Karen apparently moved out of the neighborhood shortly after her conviction. I heard through the grapevine that her family was embarrassed by the whole situation and that her husband had insisted they relocate. I felt a little bad for her family, but not for her. She had made her choices. The whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself. When Patricia first showed up in my driveway that cold January day, I could have just shut down my business to avoid the conflict. A lot of people probably would have. But I knew I was in the right, and I had the documentation to prove it. I also learned that HOAs can be a blessing or a curse depending on who's running them. The concept of an HOA isn't inherently bad. Having a group that maintains common areas and establishes basic standards for the neighborhood can be valuable. But when you get people like Patricia and Karen, who use their position to bully others and settle personal scores, it becomes toxic. The key is accountability. The new board established clear rules about how complaints would be handled, how decisions would be made, and how homeowners could challenge board actions. They published minutes from every meeting and made sure everyone in the neighborhood knew what was going on. That transparency made all the difference. My business thrived. By the end of the year, I was working 6 days a week and had a waiting list of clients. I specialized in older snow machines, the kind that people had emotional attachments to but couldn't find parts for at regular dealerships. I became known as the guy who could fix anything, and that reputation brought me steady work. I also got involved with the new HOA board, not as a member but as an advocate for reasonable policies. I wanted to make sure no one else would go through what I had experienced. We established a committee to review any proposed rule changes and make sure they were fair and necessary. We also created a dispute resolution process so that neighbors could work out conflicts without the board having to get involved. One of the most satisfying moments came about a year after the trial. The HOA was hosting a summer barbecue at the community center, and I brought one of the snow machines I had restored, a beautiful vintage Polaris from the 1980s. People gathered around to admire it, asking questions about the work I had done. Several neighbors mentioned that they had machines that needed repairs and asked if I could help them. Robert Chen came over and shook my hand. "You know, you've become a real asset to this community. Not just because of your business, but because you stood up for what was right. You showed everyone that we don't have to accept tyranny just because it comes from an HOA board." "I just wanted to do my job," I said. "That's exactly the point. You should be able to do your job without someone making your life miserable for no good reason. What you went through changed this neighborhood for the better. People aren't afraid anymore." That meant more to me than any settlement check. I had turned a bad situation into something positive, not just for myself, but for everyone in the community. The legal system had worked the way it was supposed to. When Patricia and Karen broke the law, they faced consequences. When the HOA violated its own procedures and my rights, the courts held them accountable. It wasn't quick or easy, and it cost me time and money, but in the end, justice prevailed. I also learned the importance of documentation. If I hadn't kept copies of my business license, zoning approval, HOA covenant, and all the correspondence, my case would have been much harder to prove. Every email, every letter, every citation, I kept it all organized in files. When it came time to present evidence, I had everything I needed. Jennifer Morrison became a good friend through the process. She told me later that my case had become something of a legend in the HOA law community. She used it as an example in seminars about HOA abuse and homeowner rights. Apparently, the combination of criminal charges and civil liability got people's attention. The story also had an unexpected ripple effect. After the local news coverage, I got calls from people in other neighborhoods who were dealing with similar HOA problems. I couldn't help them all directly, but I connected them with Jennifer and other attorneys who specialized in these cases. Several of them were able to resolve their situations without going to court because they learned from my experience and knew their rights. One guy called me from Anchorage with a remarkably similar story. His HOA was trying to shut down his small engine repair business, even though he was properly licensed and zoned. I walked him through everything I had learned, told him about the importance of the residential commercial overlay district designation, and connected him with an attorney in Anchorage who handled HOA cases. Last I heard, his situation was resolved without litigation because the HOA backed down once they realized he was serious about fighting. That felt good, turning my negative experience into something that could help others. It gave meaning to all the stress and frustration I had gone through. My assistant, a young guy named Jake who had just graduated from the technical college, turned out to be a natural mechanic. He learned fast and had good instincts about troubleshooting problems. Within a year, He was handling most of the basic repairs himself, which freed me up to focus on the more complex restoration projects that I really enjoyed. We expanded the workspace a bit, adding a small shed in the backyard for parts storage. I made sure to get all the proper permits and checked with the new HOA board before doing anything. They approved it without hesitation because the shed met all the size and setback requirements and didn't impact anyone else. That was what the HOA should have been doing all along, working with homeowners to make sure everyone followed reasonable rules that actually served a purpose. Instead, Patricia and Karen had been using it as their personal fiefdom, punishing anyone who didn't fit their narrow vision of what the neighborhood should be. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that Patricia had actually filed a complaint against several board members after she was forced to resign, claiming they had violated procedure in removing her. The complaint went nowhere because, unlike her improper covenant amendment, the board had followed all the correct procedures in asking for her resignation. When she refused to leave voluntarily, they held a special election and voted her out. Everything was done by the book, which must have frustrated her to no end. Karen's community service assignment was fitting. She had to work at a legal aid clinic helping low-income homeowners fight back against predatory HOA practices. I heard from someone who worked there that she was sullen and resentful the whole time, but at least she was being forced to see the other side of the equation. The probation conditions also prohibited both women from filing any complaints or reports against me to any government agency unless they had documented evidence of an actual violation. If they violated that condition, they would serve their suspended jail time. That gave me a lot of peace of mind. As winter came around again, almost 2 years after this whole mess started, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. My business was stable and profitable. The neighborhood was peaceful and well managed. I had made friends with several neighbors who had supported me through the ordeal. And I had proven to myself that I could stand up to intimidation and win. There was a moment, late one evening in December, when I was working on a particularly challenging rebuild. It was a vintage Snowmachine that had been sitting in someone's barn for 20 years, and I was trying to get it running again. The work was meticulous and frustrating, but also deeply satisfying. I stepped outside for some fresh air, looking up at the stars in the clear Alaska sky. The temperature was well below zero, and the snow crunched under my boots. This was why I lived here, why I had started this business in the first place. I loved working with machines. I loved the challenge of bringing old equipment back to life. And I loved being part of a community where people actually used snow machines as practical transportation, not just toys. Patricia and Karen had tried to take that away from me because they didn't like it, because it didn't fit their idea of what was proper. They had been willing to lie, cheat, and break the law to impose their will, and they had failed. The legal bills had been worth it. The stress had been worth it. Standing up for my rights had been worth it, not just for me, but for everyone who came after me. I went back inside and got back to work on the engine. There was a satisfaction in solving mechanical problems, in figuring out what was wrong and fixing it. In some ways, that was what I had done with the HOA situation too. I had identified the problem, gathered the evidence, followed the proper procedures, and found a solution. The snow machine started on the third try, the engine roaring to life after 2 decades of silence. I let it run for a few minutes, listening to make sure everything sounded right, then shut it down and began the process of tuning and adjusting. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Steve, the tour company owner. He had a machine that needed work and wanted to drop it off in the morning. Business as usual. I texted back that tomorrow would be fine, then returned my attention to the vintage machine in front of me. This was my life now, and nobody was going to take it away from me. I had fought for it, and I had won. The HOA situation had taught me valuable lessons about knowing your rights, documenting everything, and not backing down when you're in the right. It had also shown me the importance of good governance and accountability in community organizations. The difference between the old board and the new one was night and day. Under Robert's leadership, the HOA focused on things that actually mattered. They negotiated better rates for snow removal in the common areas. They organized neighborhood watch programs. They maintained the community center and made it available for events. They enforced rules that made sense, like keeping lawns maintained and not parking junk cars in driveways, but they did it fairly and consistently. More importantly, they were transparent. Every decision was explained, every complaint was investigated properly, and homeowners had real input into how the community was run. That was how an HOA should work. I sometimes wondered if Patricia and Karen had learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People like that rarely did. They were so convinced of their own righteousness that they couldn't see how toxic their behavior had become. But at least they couldn't hurt anyone else in this neighborhood anymore. The community had healed remarkably well. Property values were up, turnover was down, and people actually seemed happy to live here. We had block parties and holiday events. Neighbors looked out for each other. It was what a good neighborhood should be. My business continued to grow steadily. I never expanded beyond what I could handle with Jake's help because I liked keeping it manageable. I didn't want to turn it into a massive operation with employees and overhead and stress. This was perfect. Just the right size to be profitable without consuming my entire life. I also started teaching occasional classes at the technical college, sharing my knowledge about Snowmachine repair with students. It was rewarding to pass on skills to the next generation, and it gave me a connection to the broader community beyond just my business. The incident with the HOA became a defining moment in my life, but not in a negative way. It taught me that I was stronger than I thought, that I could fight back against injustice and win. It showed me the importance of community and the value of good neighbors. And it reinforced my belief that most people are reasonable and fair, even if a few bad actors can cause a lot of damage. Looking back, I wouldn't change anything about how I handled the situation. I had stayed calm, followed the proper procedures, documented everything, and fought back through legal channels. I hadn't let anger or frustration push me into doing something stupid. And most importantly, I hadn't given up. That cold January day when Patricia first showed up in my driveway felt like a lifetime ago now. So much had happened since then, so much drama and conflict and eventually resolution. But I had come out the other side stronger and more confident. My business was thriving, my community was healthy, and I had the satisfaction of knowing I had made a difference. Not just for myself, but for everyone who had been intimidated by an abusive HOA board and didn't know they could fight back. The legal precedent from my case had been cited in several other HOA disputes around Alaska. Jennifer told me that judges were using it as an example of what constituted HOA harassment and improper procedure. That meant other homeowners would have an easier time defending their rights because of what I had gone through. That was the real victory, not the settlement money or the criminal convictions, but the lasting impact on how HOAs operated. The message was clear. You can't just bully people and violate their rights without consequences. There are laws, there are procedures, and if you ignore them, you will be held accountable. As I finished up work that evening and locked the garage, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was my home, my business, my life. I had fought for it, and I had won. And nobody, not Patricia, not Karen, not any future HOA tyrant, was ever going to take it away from me. The lights were on in houses up and down the street, families settling in for the evening. Smoke rose from chimneys into the cold night air. This was a good neighborhood, a good community, and I was proud to be part of it. I walked into my house, poured myself a drink, and sat down in my favorite chair. Tomorrow there would be more snow machines to repair, more clients to help, more work to do. But tonight, I could just relax and appreciate how far I had come. The battle with the HOA was over, and I had won. Not just in court, but in every way that mattered. My business was legal, my rights were protected, and my community was better for the stand I had taken. That was worth every minute of stress and every dollar spent on attorney fees. I raised my glass in a silent toast to everyone who had supported me through the ordeal. Jennifer, Tom, Robert, Steve, and all the neighbors who had spoken up when it mattered. And to Jake, who had joined my business and helped it grow into something even better than I had imagined. The future looked bright. I had plans to expand my restoration work, maybe start specializing in rare vintage models. There was a market for that, people who wanted to preserve the history of snow machining in Alaska. I had the skills, the workspace, and now the peace of mind to pursue it. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight, I was just going to enjoy the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had done the right thing, stood up for myself, and won. The HOA had tried to shut me down, but my business license and zoning approval had proven they were wrong. The law was on my side and justice had prevailed. It was a good feeling, one I would remember for the rest of my life. And if anyone ever tried to bully me again, I knew exactly what to do. Document everything, know your rights, get good legal help, and never back down when you're in the right. That was the lesson of this whole experience, and it was a lesson I would never forget.